Hey everybody, this is Wintermute. So this is just a real quick opener to this video. Me and Jinx got together and decided we wanted to kind of do some discussions, primarily about game design in general. But we're going to use Global War 1936 as kind of a test bed, a kind of baseline. And so we're going to talk about various aspects of the rules and units and special rules or whatever within the game as it currently is. Because we both like the game and I want to play and I want to see the game progress, but also as a springboard to talk about game design principles in general and concepts in general, which is something that we both have a strong interest in, very keen interest in. So we're going to do kind of like a discussion format. This is the first one. It may be a little rough around the edges. We're not sure. We're still testing this out. We did try one prior, and it just was a disaster. Just didn't record right. So this is our second attempt, though our first finished product. So again, as with anything, whatever we talk about, I encourage people to talk with me about it and Jinx about it, and give feedback and say where you think maybe we're missing something, where we think we're spot on, where you see some other ideas maybe we didn't think about. Um, because we're definitely going to be talking about some generalities right now. Maybe we'll go into more specifics later. But this is just hopefully the first in a series, a long, ongoing series about global war and or game design as a more broad principle. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Leave some feedback if you if you did, and yeah, winter mute. Thank you. I'm recording.
All right. Do you want to clip sections out of it after, or are we just jumping right in?
Jump right in.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
jump
right.
right in.
Okay. So, Wintermute, thank you for joining me for this little chat, trying out this new experience and seeing how well it goes.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hope that this can become a regular thing as well, where we kind of just pick a topic, we just talk about it. Maybe some other people will join us at some point, and just kind of this is more what I had envisioned in the long term. That's why I mean my channel is officially named Wintermute, but I
Hmm.
call it the think tank, like Wintermute's
Right?
the
Yeah.
think tank, because that's kind of the idea. That was originally the idea behind it. I don't want to just put things out there and then have people, okay, well, that was a good idea. Well, okay, tell me why. Tell me why
Hmm.
you won't use it. Tell me
Right.
what problems you see. Maybe I missed something when I was doing the math, and it's like, oh, hey, you didn't take this into account. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's a great point. Now I got to go back to the drawing board. So
Right.
that was kind of the original. That's why I originally called it, and I still call it the think tank, because to
Mm-hmm.
me that's what I want it to be.
Yeah, the
So
end goal of what you want it to be. Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, we thought we'd kick off this kind of little chat. I'm not going to call them interviews because I think chats are more appropriate. That's what these are. It's just kind of spitballing ideas, throwing ideas back and forth without actually interviewing people and asking too much questions. Just a social strategic chat, let's call it. So I thought we'd kick this one off with talking about the recent video I did about combat values. I know we were talking on WhatsApp about it, and you said you're thinking about making your video about it as well, to just talk about combat values as well. And I thought it'd be appropriate to start this off with something like that.
yeah, and I want to put out there that there th- when you take something, when you take a really kind of complex idea
Hmm.
and you try to just break it down to the math, and you just try to break it out of the numbers, it is both incredibly useful but at the same time problematic,
Yeah, for sure.
um, because it never shows you the whole picture,
Hmm.
and at the same time it can be very useful, to, especially as a game designer, if you have an issue with, if people are telling you, you find out people just aren't playing certain units, and
Hmm.
we're gonna use global war as kind of
Yeah.
the model for what we're kind of talking about,
Right. Yeah.
in this case, but we're going to generalize it a bit. And when you are talking about, just when you're breaking it down to just the numbers, and you are asking people, how come you're not using these units? That may give you an idea of why they're not using those units,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's like, look, the math just doesn't add up.
Yeah. Well, that's
I
right.
understand where it feel why it's one IPP more than this unit over here, but it's two less than this unit over here. But that
Yeah.
still doesn't hit that sweet spot where it really feels like it's worth it.
Yeah. No,
So
that's
from a
right. Yeah.
game design standpoint, something like that is extremely useful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So when I was working on it as well, I shared a short screen in one of my videos I was making, and one of the HBG developers actually asked for a copy of my spreadsheet just to work on it with the 1914 map that they had for Global War, and using that, he kind of helped. I don't know if it helped him at all, but yeah, it was something an extra tool to use from a developer's perspective. Yeah, and it worked out quite nicely, I think. I know I use it for my board gaming stuff as well as battles and such. I use it to calculate it up. But I did want to say that. One of my commentators on that actually told me something about math in that case, right? And it's like anytime you have more than two dice rolling, so the percentages don't make sense anymore. They mathematically don't make sense. So excuse me. So if you have one tank and it succeeds on a 50% chance of hitting, right? If you have two tanks, you'd say, well, the way I would calculate is like 100% of one hit, right? Is the idea. But he says, no, that's not the case. It's like, I believe it would be something like 72% chance.
Yeah.
And so even mathematically, it doesn't quite line up, but
Mhm.
it doesn't give you much utility if you just simply say, a 72% chance of one hit and then a 12% chance of two hits or whatever the math is, right? It doesn't give you much utility of that, and it's too long. You want something that's quick enough that in a battle situation you can completely kind of calculate in your head a little bit, kind of add up the math or add up the dots on the dice if you want, and really calculate your battle values there too if you need to, right? So that's
Yeah.
another interesting thing that came up.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point. And I'm no slouch at math, but some of the
Yeah.
advanced math goes over my head. I'll
Oh
be the
yeah.
first to admit that's why I didn't go very far with computer programming.
Right.
But though I still retain some of that skills and more importantly the concepts behind it.
Mm, mm.
So you'll hear me talk about that at times. But one other problem that comes up with this kind of chart is if people just look at the numbers
Yeah.
and they fail to take the overall situation into account,
Right.
they can fall flat on their face.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And a one inaccuracy that I hear all the time from people, especially when they're talking about World War II and war in general, is,
Mm,
oh, you can break war down to the numbers and figure out who's going to win.
mm.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong. That is factually wrong. There are
Mhm.
more than enough historical examples to show
Yeah.
you how that is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not even going to delve into them. You can
Mhm.
look them up if somebody can post the comments and ask about them if they want.
Right. Yeah.
But that is wrong, and so it goes with board games as well.
Yeah.
Now, board games are a little different of an animal. They are not anywhere near as complex as real life.
Mm.
However, pound for pound, for example, artillery is very useful. You
Mhm.
get a good bang for your buck.
You do.
Okay,
Yeah.
you pair it or not, it's still a good bang for your buck. Just by
Yeah.
itself with the first
Right.
strike and all that, it's a
Yeah.
very good bang for its buck. Um, so an experienced player may go, okay, well, I'm just going to build artillery.
Mhm.
Now, more advanced players are going to go, well, that's not really a good idea. You need to mix up your armaments.
Yeah.
You'll get more mileage. No, but the numbers say this is the best way to go. I'm like, it's not. The numbers can say that's the best way to go mathematically when you're looking at a cost benefit ratio for IPP, but when you're
Yeah.
looking at all the other factors that go into the game,
Mhm.
your logic falls apart.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
a logic trap that people can fall into when they
Mm.
look at a chart like this
Right.
and go, oh, well, we can just break it all down to the numbers and figure out what the best choice is. I'm like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to look at the board state.
That's
And you'll
right.
hear
Yeah.
me when I talk about strategy in general, or I talk, you can do this and this with Japan. At the
Mm.
end of the day, I always try to remind people, it's like, but you got to look at the board.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
you're trying a tactic that your opponent is easily getting away with countering with
Yeah.
little effort,
That's
why
right.
are you going to continue to do that? You have to readjust to what the board state is.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit deceptive too, right? Like, cavalry, they have that movement too. Well, how do you calculate that in the battlefield? You might be
Mhm.
able to get cavalry into that battlefield, and yeah, but at the end of the day, the way I see it is that spreadsheet is combat values and calculates just the combat values without including movement or marines or airborne and all the strategic complications that are added in with that. So it's not like it's not like a value weighted thing for all your units, you know, like the best quality units. It's basically more for combat value, which is the best combat value. But you're absolutely correct. You know, it's not as simple as all that. There's many other factors that come into play. And you know, there's a whole thing about power projection. Like a transport has no combat value, right? It's, you know, no combat value, but the potential for threat projection, not in just one territory, but 6 territories, well, that's a bigger story, right? You know, and it's hard to compute that into a spreadsheet for sure.
Yeah, 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 and that's why, you know, any game, and really, now there are games that have been designed out there that you can break down to like a mathematical equation or an
Yeah, yeah,
algorithm.
that's right.
Quite
Yeah.
frankly, I don't want to play those games.
No, same.
I, I know there's gonna be a very controversial statement. I hate chess.
Yeah, well,
I hate
I'm.
chess because of that. I do.
Me
Chess does
too. Me
not
too.
interest me as a game. It's a great game. I understand where it fits in the overall arc of
Yeah,
history of games,
yeah,
and it's a great game. But people put it on a pedestal. I honestly don't think it
yeah,
deserves,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
because there
Well, that's
really
holdover
is.
from the Cold War era.
Yeah. In some ways, yeah. That's actually a good point. I think there's kind of an archaic thought
Yeah,
process that goes into
that's right.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You know what? Dice are frustrating,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah,
at the
totally.
end of the day, especially in a game like Global War or any sort of got dudes on a map kind of game, um, you know, I've heard another game reviewer say, you know, overall, dice are still the best way to represent
Sure.
the randomness of combat,
Yeah, yeah.
because
This,
you can't count on things to work your way.
that's right. Yeah. You know, a slight detour on this one. You won't be able to see it on there. But I was watching a YouTube video. They have like a not board game conventions, but maybe it's just gaming conventions, but like game design conventions. So GDC, YouTube videos
Mhm,
on that
mhm.
on YouTube, and so there's some board game designers that come out there and do stuff. And one guy, he hosts Ludology podcast, which is a podcast specifically about board game design. At one point, he does a video talking about pink noise, white noise, and brown noise, and he says in games you need to have pink noise, which I thought was really interesting. And so what he describes as white noise, everybody kind of knows white noise is kind of static, right? So static, but kind of staying within certain parameters, right? It doesn't go really beyond it. It just goes up and down, up and down. Brown noise, it's something more extreme, where it's jumping up and down, you know, quite a bit more. I can't remember exactly with brown noise, but pink noise has a certain amount of variety. It's a little bit white noise, but then it bounces up once in a while with that random chance. And so I describe kind of Euro games. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but for the most part, they're kind of white noise. They kind of stay within the boundaries of that static line. And so the perfect game design is one where it pops out with little odd random chances of certain things happening. And I think that's when it comes to unit design, that's when certain things like you know, the interception ability of fighters, perhaps the Marines and the airborne, that little random chance that make things kind of unique and special. Because otherwise, if you're just calculating combat factors, it gets kind of boring.
I think a good example of that is target selection,
Right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
where, okay, yeah, I rolled a hit, great, that's
yeah,
another hit,
that's
another
right.
infantry dead, move on. Or,
Mhm.
oh, I rolled that target selection, oh, now things get interesting.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, you know, the
You have a
obvious choices.
choice what to do. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The obvious choice is the medium armor, but
Right,
maybe there's a reason to
right.
take out that Panzer Grenadier.
Sure, sure.
You
Yeah,
know, and I like that notion, and some of the house rules I come up with and talk about, a lot of them kind of revolve around that,
mm,
around kind of spicing things up.
yeah,
And you know, it's okay, you got 5 hits, 5 infantry dead.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I
yeah.
mean, and I
Yeah,
mean, I understand for a very straightforward combat system, that's
yeah,
fine, and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
criticizing that.
No,
I
no.
like to add a little more spice to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Those ways
one,
kind of streamline the system quite nicely, but
mhm,
at the expense of a little bit of flavor and variety, right? You know, you lose a little
mhm.
bit of that spice, like you say.
And another good example of, I think, when it comes to looking at unit design
Mm,
is finding the right spot, the sweet spot for a unit, are tank
yeah,
destroyers.
yeah,
And I know I've talked about this example with you before, where I think that they are, I know some people are kind of, it seems to be a 50-50 split. Some people are like, I never build them. I never want to, I don't
same.
care.
I don't, yeah.
And I'm on and then other people are like, oh yeah, I love them, they're great.
Mm,
Now, I definitely think they're situational, and that's
sure.
fine. There's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
They fill a niche. But
Mm,
if you have nobody buying them, then again, that goes back to, why is that?
yeah,
And maybe it's a real small tweak to from the designer's perspective.
Mm.
Now, you know, like maybe nobody's buying it because they're like, oh, yeah, that I get where it fits, but it just doesn't work for me. It's like, okay, well, what if it was a 4-6? What if those
Yeah.
were its basic stats?
Yeah.
Okay, now that changes
Yeah.
things a
That's
little.
right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
suddenly, you don't want to go overboard and make it overpowered, but maybe that's just that small tweak that
Mm.
kind of
Mm.
fit, makes it just right. Maybe it goes down to 4 IPP instead, but now it's
Yeah.
got target selection 1 to
Yeah.
2.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe you start seeing a lot more of them pop up on the
Mm.
board.
Mm. Mm.
Um, so, from a game design perspective, a chart like this, again, lets you see some of that stuff and lets you get a okay, yeah, I think now that I can see the overall, I can get a better idea of where this unit should
That's
fit
right.
within the spectrum
Yeah.
of possibilities.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's that.
Mm.
One thing I know we wanted to talk about was good and bad units.
Right. So maybe now is a good time to share this screen here, and we'll just go off of that and kind of go off down the list. So let's see. Here we go. So here we have it. So this list, as you see, it has attack chance, defense chance, with fort as well, because I think forts are one of those things that need a fine tuning adjustment. Just in my opinion. Look, when I'm
Mhm.
talking about Global War 36, I'm not bashing it whatsoever. I actually like the
Yeah,
game. I
yeah.
have it here in front of us, and I know you do too. It's a fun game to play. So when we talk about it, and if we share any kind of things that we might improve and such, it's one of the beauties of the game is that it's constantly evolving. Like these games I have here, they're all done. They're not making any other additions. So the beauty of
Mhm.
this game is that it's constantly evolving, and I like that, right? And its
Mhm.
feedback from the community means that it's play tested more and more and more and becomes a better game. So by saying this stuff, don't consider it. If any viewers out there, don't consider us bashing anything. We're just having a chat. The benefits and downsides of certain things as we see them in their current state, and they're also just our opinions at the end of the day. It doesn't need to be said, but should I suppose.
And like I
Okay.
said, before, I welcome people to challenge me if I say something and they're like, "Yeah, I think you're off the mark." Politely and professionally and
Sure. Yeah.
logically, I
Absolutely.
want to, I don't want you calling me bad names. I don't want any ad
Yeah.
hominem attacks and
Yeah.
no
That's right.
logical
Yeah.
fallacies. Just
Yeah.
don't waste our time.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And we're and let's jump in feet first.
Sure.
And you know what I'm about to say, I'm sure. I'm going to
Seaplanes. No.
start seaplanes. Yeah. Uh, very, very, and here's the thing, and to go back to the point you just made, conceptually, seaplanes are just fine.
Yeah.
I think in execution, they fall really short of the mark. They're way too expensive
Mm.
for what they do. I understand why they put them in. They explained it right in the rule book why they put them in and what their logic was behind them, and it nothing. I have no criticisms there whatsoever. It makes sense. However, at the end of the day, their cost is just
Yeah. Yeah.
way too much.
Yeah.
Way
Yeah.
too much.
For sure.
And again, what is the solution there? Is it just dropping the cost? Maybe not. Is it dropping the cost dramatically and then maybe cutting back some of the stats
Mm.
to hit that sweet spot? Maybe adjust some of their special abilities,
Mm.
things like that. I don't have a good solution for that. I'm just
No.
saying right now, everybody as far as I know, universally says seaplanes aren't really that worth it. And
No.
I've even made an argument to the rest of my group and to you guys via WhatsApp, where there is a reason to to build seaplanes that people don't realize right off the bat. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, but even with that, I still don't think that they just missed the mark at the end
Yeah.
of the day. So I
I
think there
agree.
needs to
Yeah.
be some sort of adjustment to them.
But it is a first edition with or it is
Right. Yeah.
the first edition with seaplanes in them. So next edition will probably be better and adjusted. My personal thing is like I know I read this book about the Baltic Sea in World War II, and it surprising how much action actually happened in the Baltic Sea. Like they say, there's more people just because of German kind of convoys retreating from the Soviet attack. There's like more people died in the Baltic Sea than did, I can't remember where else it was, but just massive amounts of people and generally unknown, right? And then
Mhm.
British seaplanes just bombing the Baltic to bits and such. So a lot of action happened there. But my opinion with seaplanes is I don't really like it as a unit. I think there should be a better unit to replace that unit. Just because I don't know, it doesn't seem like it has too much to contribute. Like it could only hit submarines and transports, so already you're narrowing the margin of what it can do down to a tiny little bit, and it could also convoy raid, so there's that. And it's just like, well, I wouldn't mind something that would add a little bit more complex and depth, not just in the seas, but everywhere else. If you're adding a unit, why not add a unit that you can utilize across the board, right? Because
Mm.
as it is, it's like only a few nations actually want a single seaplane. I
Yeah,
would
yeah, yeah,
say.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're both in agreement there. And how to tweak them.
Yeah,
Should they come off the board completely as a unit? Yeah. Maybe you just build a seaplane base, and then it
sure.
provides like an area of
Mhm.
protection,
Sure.
like all adjacency, all sea zone it's in, and all adjacency. That's
Yeah,
another concept. It helps remove some figurines off the
yeah,
board and
that's right.
still makes it possibly, I'm assuming, worth it by the time you do the
Yeah,
math.
yeah, yeah.
That's a possibility too.
Mhm.
And that kind of, but that's another kind of design concept
Mhm.
thing about how to handle fixes or
Yeah,
adjustments and things like that.
yeah.
And I, do you, and I've used this example before, and I at one point I asked a buddy of mine, John, who's very like absolutely
Yeah.
insane with his history knowledge of World War II. I asked him because I played Europa, which is
Mm.
a chit game, and that you
Right.
could break units down to like brigade levels.
Yeah.
And so you would have just, I mean, they were literally like, I think the base game, which was the first half of the Russian invasion, was 3,000 chits alone. The
Mm,
second
wow.
half of the Russian was another 3,000 chits.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is a very sprawling kind of game. And at one point I mentioned, I was talking about AA guns with him, and I go, so John, here's the thing. AA guns, I know there was a lot of motorized anti-aircraft in the German army during World War II. I've seen the chits on
Mm,
the table. I
mm,
know there was a substantial amount.
mm.
Would this game benefit from adding a motorized AA unit to it?
Right.
And he goes, well, here's the thing. He goes, yes, you're right. There was a lot more than this than the way this game was kind of laid out would let you think.
Mm-hmm.
However, most of it was on a subdivisional level,
Mm.
meaning they didn't create like a division of flak or even a small division or whatever. I don't know the breakdown very
Yeah.
well. um they actually would go, okay, well, here's an infantry division, and each brigade has its own
Yeah.
flak truck to go
Yeah.
with it when it goes and
Right.
does things. Or here's 10 panzers, every 10 panzers has two
Right.
motorized flak guns with
Yeah.
it. So it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So now from a game designer perspective, I want to include some concept of mechanized AA.
Mm.
What's the best way to do it? Do you actually put a unit into the game that is just like a flat gun, only it has a movement of 2, and now it costs 5 IPP to build?
Mm.
Versus maybe you allow X for every X number of units involved in a battle, they just get a
Yeah.
flak shot.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
One way is perfectly, the putting another unit on the board is perfectly reasonable, but it has some drawbacks. One, it
Mm.
increases the cost of playing the game. Two, it's more guys on the board that you have to kind of create space
Yeah.
for.
That's right. Yeah.
And like I've said before, I have the biggest map possible, and I still have to use army markers at times
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
because Europe is just Europe. You can only fit so much.
Mm.
And already it's much bigger than it is in real life on this
Yeah.
map,
That's right. Yeah.
just to give you space.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, so from a game design perspective, there's that. But then what about the other thing? Well, yeah, you miss out on the opportunity of making very nice miniatures.
Mm.
And I love those mobilized flat guns that they have in the America game.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Those
Oh, yeah.
miniatures in the America game are fantastic. I love them. I would like to put them on the board more. But on the other hand, is it simpler and easier to kind of create kind of a blanket rule? And maybe we move seaplanes off the board, but if you put a seaplane base there, it's a zone of protection that helps inhibit submarines and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that you've got to factor in. And a chart like this
Yeah.
can help you come to that conclusion. It's like, well, do I want to add more units to this, or do I want to
Right.
just add another special, relatively simple special ability to some of these other units?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
What's the best way to
Yeah.
represent that?
Right, like you
Um,
could almost say like if you have a seaplane base and your aircraft are operating within that seaplane base, then the aircraft have an increased chance to hit subs or something like that, right? Like there's different ways to do it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then there's the actual execution, the
Yeah.
minutia, the math is there's numerous ways to handle it.
Sure. Absolutely, yeah. And like you say, real estate on the map itself is at a premium sometimes in some places, right? Like in the C zones, you actually have sufficient space in a lot of C zones that you could have all the
Unless you're
units
the
have
Japanese,
HP.
unless you're the starting Japanese Navy.
Well, that's right, yeah, that's true. Some of them get a bit tight, yeah.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you could have all the units that you have here. But for land, it's a lot scarcer because they're a lot smaller as well. So I don't know if yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's the thinking there. Yeah,
So, looking at this overall chart, and I know you touched on this some in your initial video.
yeah.
What are the units? Now we've picked on seaplanes enough. What are some other units that you just think are missing the mark?
Well, before I get into that, I want to say that I think it'd be nice if HBG had like a streamlined version of the board, not the board, sorry, the units, right? Have a kind of base amount to use, and then provide these other ones as options, right? So,
Mhm.
I like everything that they provide. I just between the real estate, can't afford it, all this other kind of stuff. I think it would be nice to streamline and cut some out. So it's not a matter of taking certain ones that don't miss the mark and taking them out or adjusting them. Sometimes it's just I keep it all, but just it'd be nice to kind of have a streamlined version a little bit more. That's my thinking on it because you could have some fantastic games with 10 different types of units. I've played one of my other favorite games is Twilight Imperium, and that's a
Yeah.
fantastic game. And they have only 10 different types of units. They might have 11 now, but fantastic, right? And it provides everything that you need within the game. So I don't think there needs to be so many, but I like having the option of having that many. So I don't think HB should slim it down in any way. Just provide an optional rule where you aren't obligated to have everything. So from the top down, I guess. I want to hear eventually. Maybe we should do this in another chat about your thoughts on militia. I think that'd be interesting to talk about
That's
because
probably a topic on its own.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think so because I feel like they miss the mark. Like that's my go-to thing. I build a ton of militia everywhere. For certain nations, it radically benefits. Next game I play as Russia, unless they change it before then, or unless I'm not playing as Russia, is I plan on because they get a discount of $1 on the first turn of that
Mhm.
war. Build 52 militia across the map. They each cost $1. Sure, they might take you a while to get over here, but 52 militia, like, yeah, that's fantastic. They all defend at 2. You put a couple fortifications down. You're defending at 4 for your militia. It's pretty fantastic, right? You just swarm the map with militia. So they absolutely missed the mark, and I'm not sure exactly. Well, I think you've come up with a good solution that we should talk about later on. I find cavalry is not really representative in this game of the time period. For me, I've invaded Russia with, like the Hun invasion from the west kind of thing, right? The Mongol invasion from the west, because you just need cavalry and that's it. You don't need infantry, you don't need tanks. You just go in with cavalry and some aircraft and you're done, right? So cavalry missed the mark. I think they should be limited to 2 per turn. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a fair compromise on that.
Hmm.
Now I think maybe that limit should be lifted for maybe China and
Sure.
CCP
Yeah.
and the
No,
KMT
that's right. Yeah.
and some
Yeah.
of the more the non-industrialized nations.
Basically, the
Um,
nations that have a restricted build chart, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So I think maybe that's a fair limit not to put on them. But I think making them a specialist unit I think is
Yeah.
fair. And again, I've seen there cavalry was used in a cavalry role, not a traditional cavalry
Yeah.
role, but a
Yeah.
cavalry role. They were more like fast moving infantry.
That's right. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they didn't do cavalry charges.
No.
That never happened in
No.
Poland, contrary to popular belief.
Yeah.
The Poles actually their cavalry was one of their most effective units throughout the war
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when they were being invaded.
Mhm.
And the one time where they got that bad reputation was
Yeah,
because
that's
they were sacrificing themselves
yeah.
to let other people escape. It was not a
That's
stupid move at all. It was a calculated risk, a very dangerous one. So yeah,
mhm.
but they were basically fast moving infantry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you're right though. The cost versus benefit ratio of cavalry is staggering
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of what they can do.
Mhm.
Um, because I'll tell you what, if you were to, you can kind of break down some of the core stats
Sure.
and their values.
Yeah.
And if you make an attack, give it a value of 1, and a defense, a value of 1, and then you can kind of work off that math. But then how do you rate movement? A movement of 1, let's say we'll give it a rating of 2
Sure.
for terms of calculating the overall value when you're really just comparing units. But a movement of 2 is not a total of 4, it's more like a 6, a 7, an 8.
Yeah, your threat
The
projection
ability
is
to move two
Yeah.
zones in one turn in a game that is only 2 turns per year is huge.
huge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Huge.
Plus, add to the fact that mountains don't affect cavalry, and they're just disproportionately amazingly good units, right? Like,
Yeah, and that's another topic we should probably discuss at some point is the IPP values of certain units and the scale of certain IPP values.
Yeah.
Real quick, I'll just throw this out there because I think that motorized infantry are undervalued, under cost at only 4 IPP.
I never build them, so I don't know.
I do.
Really?
I do. Oh yeah. And that's again, I'm just kind of putting that idea out there. I think they're really more worth a 5 in the grand scheme because that second movement point is huge.
Right. Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's something worth talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a different discussion for a different time though. But I just wanted to put that out there as an example of when it comes to the difference between a movement of 1 and a movement of 2 for a ground unit is huge. Huge.
The only time I would build motorized if I was utilizing their special ability, but that's just me though, right? Like they can tow artillery, so that's quite nice. You know, you almost have they attack at 3, defend at 4, and you could haul artillery that attacks at 3, defends at 3. So that's why I would build them. But you know, I've never utilized that in a strategy. Yeah. Can they tow anti-aircraft? I think they can.
Yep.
Okay. So
Oh, and I do that regularly as Russia.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think artillery are good too, but I think artillery. Again, maybe this is too fiddly, right? Maybe a person doesn't want to go into this fiddly bits to this level of detail. But artillery is mostly as supportive, not combat value on its own. So I think there should be something to represent that they, you know, instead of supporting 1 infantry, maybe they always support 2 infantry, but they only attack and defend at a 2 or something like that. Maybe, or something like that. I don't know exactly how to do it with that. For attack and defense, they support, say, 3 infantry.
And actually, I did ask my buddy John again about this. I'm like, John, you know, artillery really only give their benefit on the attack. Shouldn't they give their benefit on the defense as well? He goes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He goes, absolutely. Historically, that makes perfect sense. Now, obviously, that makes artillery, as they are currently worked, way more powerful. And he said, and he even added, he goes, not only should they support infantry, they should support every ground unit.
Everything,
historically speaking. Armor, mechanized, motorized, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Artillery was still king of the battlefield during World War II.
And realistically, from the design perspective, a +1 to infantry and a +1 to tank, you're still getting a +1, so it shouldn't matter who it goes to, right? Like, you know, I don't see there being an issue.
Now, of course, again, if you were to include that, the value of artillery, you would almost have to, I mean, we're looking at not just bumping it up to a 5 at that point of cost per piece. We're talking more like a 6 almost.
Well, I would think we'd drop down the combat and defense value.
And that, and yeah, maybe we bump it up to 5. We drop the attack value. You know, there's and this is that finding that sweet spot that comes with play testing.
That's right. Yeah. Let's kind of skip a little ahead because we don't have unlimited tank destroyers. I know we've both talked about that a little bit. Yeah, it's one of those units that I don't bother just because I like to have a kind of a clean setup without too many variety of units. Light armor is completely out the window, but I don't think it should be. I don't think light armor should be out the window in the mid-war. I think it should still have a role in the fight.
Yes, and I again, and this is, and anytime I advocated change, it's usually starts from a historical thing.
Yeah.
Now, historically speaking, Germany did not invade Poland or France with anything that would have been considered medium armor.
No, that's right.
It was all light armor.
That's right.
And as a matter of fact, technically speaking, Poland had tanks that were really difficult for the German armor to deal with.
Sure.
They were
Yeah.
these heavy behemoths that were
Yeah.
insanely difficult. They only had like 30 or 40 of
Yeah.
them, and they
Yeah.
broke down half the time, so
Yeah.
they were ineffective.
Right.
But and the light tanks were just sort of doing circles around them, going into the backfield, cutting their support, and then just kind of letting them die. Things like that happened. But really, it was all light armor that did the blitzing.
Yeah.
It was
Like
all light
nobody
armor.
is, as far as I know, nobody builds light tanks unless it's for Spain. That's the only time I've ever seen anybody build light tanks.
Once medium armor becomes available, I could see Italy building some in North Africa for a little bit more punch.
Cavalry, no
Um,
cavalry.
yeah,
They only cost three as opposed to light tank four, and I think it's the better option.
yeah. And I there is one point I want to make though. When you're factoring in terrain,
Hmm.
okay, let's say you are going to build 4 cavalry versus 3 light armor.
Hmm.
But then you're attacking into a territory. You've 2 different times you're attacking into the same territory, but both of them get a -1.
Yeah.
The cavalry is a net -4 to its total offensive power. The light armor is a net -3
Why is that? I don't quite figure.
because your four cavalry are
Oh
suffering
yeah, okay,
the
gotcha. Yeah.
penalty
So
versus
I
3
understand. I
tanks
understand.
suffering the penalty.
Yeah,
Now this is
I
a very
understand.
small, and the difference here isn't very big. When
Hmm.
you actually look at the final numbers.
Hmm.
But if you're talking about a bigger scale conflict, then that
Hmm.
might be a consideration where,
Right.
you know what, I know this army that I'm building in North Africa is going to just slog through
Yeah.
terrain. So
Right.
it might actually be better to build a couple high quality pieces
Sure.
to support the chaff moving into
Yeah. Yeah.
the cannon fodder moving in for
Yeah.
that reason.
Right. Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
it's you the numbers the end numbers kind of change, and that might be why
Yeah.
you kind of change that.
Mm-hmm.
Just something I want to throw out there when you're
No,
doing
that's
the
good.
math in your head.
No.
Whether that's a big enough penalty or thing to worth, I think it's only worth considering in certain situations, but it is something to keep in the back of your head.
What about this? So I was gonna say, like in regards to North Africa, you're right. Yeah, mathematically you do suffer 4 as opposed to 3, but you also have more units to take as casualties. But anyways, for light tanks, what about if you tied it in somehow with 2 impulses?
Um, well, okay, in my house, in the several variations of the house rules I've
Two
come up,
blitz or
I
whatever.
actually had light tanks. 2 light tanks count as 1 medium tank for blitzing.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That was an idea I'm going to
Yeah,
eventually put out there
it
as a
works.
house
Yeah.
rule.
I was thinking like
Um,
just spitballing an idea. That's not a bad idea. I actually don't mind it. But what about if you had once you get to a certain year, you'd say each light tank can blitz twice. So you do 1 regular attack, but 2 blitzes. I mean, the movement doesn't add up to that,
I
but
think
because
that
it's 6 months, right? It's not a lot. It's a length of time that a person could.
yeah, I think that becomes okay. I'm not gonna pan it, but I think there might be some problems there that it
Sure.
needs to be play tested. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, anything needs to be play tested.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You can do the math in your head all the time,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
many times as you want, until you put the guys on the table and roll dice and look at the
Yeah.
overall situation.
That's right.
You're never going to get a full picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
So okay, yeah, light armor is an issue. What are so?
We should probably
Let
move
me.
on a little quicker, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
heavy armor. So, heavy armor. I'd only build one if I was in a desperate situation. Like I only have 1 factory slot, so I got to build got to utilize as much as possible. I don't see it much
I
use.
think kind of like I feel about tank destroyers that pepper them out there in your army.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
If you're fighting somebody who's being very mech heavy, a
yeah,
lot of tanks, a lot of mechanized
sure.
infantry,
Yeah,
things like that, then you put more out
yeah.
there than you would otherwise.
That's right. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just more infantry and artillery, and
Mhm.
then the supporting stuff. So that's kind of how I look at heavy
Yeah,
armor. Is
yeah.
it's not going to win, and that's another issue to talk about when it
The
comes
problem is
to.
it's behind a tech wall as well, so that makes them they almost should be cheaper because they're behind a tech wall.
And in a general sense, I think most of the tech that immediately takes effect is more useful, more valuable, and you're going to get a better bang for your buck. than the tech that is, okay, you have it now. Now you can start building that unit.
Mm. Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason is that you're right. Now, mathematically speaking, paying 2 more IPP for a piece of heavy armor versus a medium armor, which is now an 8/7, it
Mm.
is the paying 2 more IPP is worth it in terms of compared to the cost versus
Mm.
stats
Mm.
versus cost ratio of the other
Right.
units.
Right.
That is worth it. And then you throw in the other ability of target selection 1.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just kind of icing on the cake at that
Yeah.
point.
It
So it
is.
is
It is.
worth it,
It is.
mathematically, but in the grand scheme of things, I think that by the time you get them, you probably won't even want them.
No. Yeah.
You're better off building, 2 medium tanks instead,
Mm.
and finding the least common denominator. Now that may
Mm.
not always be the case, and again, you got to look at the overall situation. And of course,
Right.
Germany has Tiger tanks.
Yeah. And that makes
Those
sense.
are great.
Yeah, for sure. For
Those are
Germany,
worth
it makes
putting out
sense.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you can
That's right.
afford those, put them out there. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So fighter or jet fighters suffer the same problem.
They
Now
do.
they
Yeah.
do have a substantially higher interception rating,
They do. Yeah.
which
That's right.
is something to take into consideration. I
Hmm.
think that they need a little bit more umph though to make them a little more worth it.
I think so.
And I have some ideas for that. I won't go into them here. Um, I think air transports are just a little too expensive.
Mm.
Even if they drop them by 1 point, I think I would be a lot happier with them.
Yeah.
They're not as useful as I think they sound at the end of the day.
I always found them very useful, but they're useful against people who are not that experienced in playing. So they're kind of in this kind of in a cheesy kind of way, right?
And I
So,
know what you're talking about. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I
But
just
I
think
do
that they're
like
a
the price. I find the
little,
prices. Yeah.
yeah, I think they're just a little overcost.
Yeah.
Coastal subs, torpedo boat destroy. Oh, that was another question I want to ask real quick. And
Mhm.
I know we talked about this before. I would divert just a little bit.
Sure.
The
Hey,
units, the obsolete units. Go ahead.
before you do that, I want to quickly say something about air stuff. I think
Yeah.
air should be redesigned, broadly speaking. I think they should be redesigned. I think you should have air like fighters should be fighters against other aircraft, and that should be their primary role. They should have an attack value against, just like just like Navy has a shore bombardment rating. So aircraft should have against the air, against the ground, and against the Navy, and they should have these three different things, right? That's the way it should be laid out. And so instead of seaplane, have torpedo bomber, and then you have your land tactical bomber, your torpedo bombers, you can keep your medium, and you get the idea. But your fighters would be useless against the ground, but really good against the air. And every combat round there'd be a round of like pre-combat. Every combat round you just pre-round air battle, right? You do air battle and then you do the land stuff. Air battle
Yeah.
and then the land stuff. That would be my thinking. And I've designed it and I want to make a video about it. And this is like from years ago that I want to cover it. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on aircraft, how they should be
Yeah,
redesigned.
and I generally agree with you on
Mm.
that. I think my idea of how to execute it is a little different, but
Yep,
we're
yep,
we're
yep.
marching down the same path.
That's one thing I want to
Um,
say is like good ideas tend to rise to the top, while bad
mhm.
ideas fall to the side. So there's many times that we've talked and I share something or you share something. It's like, hey, I have the exact same thing, and it's like, well, what do you know, right? Like everybody has the same good ideas. Which when you suggest this and when other people suggest it, it's not mean. It doesn't mean that this person stole from this person. It's just that's where the good ideas go. They rise to the top of
The
everything.
marketplace, the free market, or the market free marketplace of ideas. That's what I'm
Right.
trying to say.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that.
Mhm.
So okay, I want to get this question out there real. How do you feel about those obsolete units that start the game on the board?
Mostly the ships, right?
The coastal submarines, coastal defense ships,
Mhm.
and torpedo boat destroyers. I think are the three.
Yeah.
I think they're the only 3 types.
The
How do you
only
feel
three,
about
unless you're
those?
playing with the early fighters, I think, and even then, I'm not sure if you could build them.
No,
I've
you can
never played.
build early. You can build early war fighters,
Yeah,
and
okay.
I've looked at that rule extensively because
Yeah.
I like the idea. The execution is very logistically difficult,
Right. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
like the idea. The you can build them just like any other fighter. They're just not as effective.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which I think makes them flawed because they're cheaper, so you'll end up buying more of those to absorb your hits. But we'll go into that some other time. Okay. So I I like the idea of because I love World War I history. So
Mhm.
coastal defense ships, coastal submarines. I get it because it's a holdover from the previous generation or previous war. So I like it for that concept, but I think it adds complexity into the game, adds three different units that, you're not going to build anyways. They're just going to disappear off the board. And I get why they include them because they want to, some neutral nations, they need a little bit more than a cruiser and a little bit less than a battleship. So I understand.
Mhm.
But when you roll out the map with new players, it's one thing that you have to kind of describe to them. Another reason you have to open up your unit chart list, and another thing to remember for rules and such. And yeah, it's just not ideal. I think there should be a more streamlined version of it. That's just my thinking behind it.
And I think new players to the game are perfect. It's perfectly reasonable for them to simply say, all right, I don't own torpedo boat destroyer
Yeah,
figurines.
yeah,
I'm just going to take, like for Britain, I think they start with two of them in the game. I'm going to take two of them off,
yeah,
and I'm going to put a destroyer somewhere in the middle,
yeah,
physically in the middle, and that'll just represent those two ships. And we're going to just
yep,
move on. And I
yep.
think that is perfectly reasonable for
Mm,
your play group and for people who don't have the extra money to invest in the game or initial capital. Like,
mm,
over
mm,
time, they can build up into it. Um, and coastal defense ships can be represented by battle cruisers instead.
yeah.
And what was the other one? Or
Coastal subs.
coastal. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, God damn, they suck.
yeah, they suck. Yeah,
Coastal subs just drive me nuts. You could
yeah,
take, you know what? I would take the three that Italy starts off the game with. I would replace it with one sub,
sure,
and I'd call it a day.
sure, yeah,
And the only other nation that I think that starts off with more than one is
yeah,
America. I think they start off with
yeah,
two, and I could be
yeah.
wrong about
I
that.
agree.
And quite frankly, you could just take them off the board, and I wouldn't really feel like it's that big of
No,
a deal.
no, that's right.
Um,
From
uh,
Italy's
co-
perspective, though, they want it because that's hit points, right? That's three hit
oh yeah,
points.
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
so
And that's fine, and I get why they're there. And you could also I have made the argument that maybe the game could use light subs and normal subs because light subs were more useful and better adapted to the Mediterranean and
mhm,
shallower waters.
mhm,
But that's also another layer of complexity.
yeah,
That's a different discussion.
sure, it is. Yeah.
But yeah, I think new players can just swap them out for heavy
Mm,
destroyers or whatever the case may be, whatever they think the best equivalent is. And even General Hand Grenade said at one point early on with this new edition, he goes, look, if you don't have the pieces, just don't play with them.
mm.
There's no new unit that is that vital
Yeah, yeah, that's
to
true.
the playability of the game and the balance of the game that
Yeah,
you couldn't not play with it. And I think that's a fair point.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now I will
yeah. It
say
adds flavor. Yeah,
I do like the wider variety of naval units that are out in this edition. And
right.
I know some people don't like light cruisers and heavy cruisers and battle cruisers. And yeah, maybe we could take those three and shrink them down to just two options. Maybe cruisers, maybe we'll just recommit cruisers into one category again. That's
Mm.
fine. You know what? I think that's a fair point. But I like that there's more options than just destroyer,
Yeah,
cruiser, battleship.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
I do. I really do.
For me, I
So I
don't
don't want
mind
to
it.
see that go away.
Yeah, I don't mind it, but it doesn't provide enough variety, right? Like
Mhm.
battle cruiser, okay, one hit point and X amount of combat value and this X amount of shore bombardment value. Heavy cruiser, same thing. Light cruiser, same thing. Like it's just shrinking the same thing. It's not. It's like a smaller apple. It's not apple and orange. It's like just a smaller apple, right? And
Mhm.
I don't think that's ideal solution. They should be like light cruiser should be your anti-aircraft kind of proponent in the
Mhm.
fleet. Your battle cruiser could be your super fast battleship, right? I'm of the mindset that I think battleships should have four hit points. Heavy cruisers two, and battle cruisers let's give them three, because you have more survivability of your
Hey,
fleet.
that
And that's
that was
all.
that. No, 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 no. That was my idea.
No, it's
I already had
not.
that idea. Yeah, no, I honestly, and actually, John can back me up on this. We talked extensively about this when we played second edition about how
Okay.
battleship should be able to take three hits. Basically,
Yeah.
everything from a cruiser up gains an extra hit point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically,
Sure. Yeah.
basically.
I agree.
And
I agree.
I think repair, shipyards would become more useful
Yeah.
then.
That's
There's
right. Yeah.
more reason to put your ships into port. I think it's
Mhm.
again a little more historically
Mhm.
accurate. Ships took a lot of damage before they went down
Yeah.
sometimes.
And I would say give the defender a retreat option. I think that's important
Mhm.
too because then you don't just hammer everything into oblivion. Sure, make it disadvantageous to them, right? To the defender, right? If everybody retreats, make them retreat at half combat value, right? So you have one more round of combat where the attacker's rolling at half value and the defender as well. And so because the defender wants to retreat, so he's going to be outnumbered anyways. So he's going to still suffer more casualties than the attacker, right? But you know,
Hmm.
you have a chance to get away because it's mobile battlefield. Like I'm not great on American history just because it's one of those things that we're so engulfed by American history here in Canada that it's like I'll save that for later once I take care of like German history and Italian
Yeah, that's
history,
fair. That's fair.
right?
Yeah.
But I know like the I read all kinds of books because there's a lot of books by American fighters and Navy men. So the tin can something about the tin can sailors or something like that, right? You know, the aircraft carriers retreating, and the tin can, you know, the United States destroyers laying out a smoke screen just to retreat, like a
Hmm.
famous battle that occurred. So there was sufficient mobility in
Yep.
World War II and ways of getting away from battle. Like they figured this out from a long time ago that you could
Hmm.
actually retreat if you want to.
Yeah. And I think that there is and that's a whole nother house rule that I want to
Mm,
go
yeah.
into
Oh
about
yeah.
attackers get the option to retreat,
Yeah.
defenders get the option to withdraw.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with when withdrawing, there's penalties. There's
Penalties.
a
Yeah.
you have to suffer
Absolutely.
through some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so okay. Yeah, and so we're kind of
Right. So let's
so
go
we're
back
throwing a
to
lot at the wall, and we're
we
kind of
are.
laying the groundwork for other discussions
Yeah, that's right.
that require that really
That's right.
deserve their own video.
That's right. Yeah. But I want to quickly end with this. Well, to continue here with the cruisers, like the thing is, there is a variety, but not a variety of fruit, just different sizes of apples. Maybe that's the
Hmm.
best way of putting it, right? The
Yeah, I think
battleship
it's
is
fair.
big, light cruisers small, and there needs to be more complexity behind them to make them more interesting. Because right now you just
Hmm.
look at the mathematical value on the spreadsheet and say, hey, light cruisers, especially after you get your improved shipyards or construction tech, they're the
Hmm.
best bang for your buck. Let's just span them as much as possible, right?
Hmm.
You need more of that pink noise value where they do
Hmm.
something unique and different. So you have a very
Yep.
diverse fleet where it's like, well, I want to build a little bit of this and that and that and that, right? You get the idea. So,
Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, I do. Yep.
right on. I think that covers it. We've made it underneath an hour so far.
Okay. That's it, man. We can go for another. I can go for another
Oh, I
two
know, right?
hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I think the next video should be about militia.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. We'll set that up.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, so for the time being, this is Winter Mute signing off. Hopefully this will become a kind of a regular thing. We're gonna post this video on both our channels, and then we'll probably bounce back and forth so that we're not double posting the exact same video all the time. But this way, our initial concept kind of gets out there to anybody who's interested. And if there's any other YouTubers watching this who would like to join in
Yeah.
on this conversation, contact us, let us know. Of course, if you think we're way off the mark on our assessments about some of these units, leave comments in the post below. And maybe we'll have to do follow-up videos to this, because somebody could post something that kind of triggers that deserves its own
Yeah.
video.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well said. Alrighty then.
Cool.
Signing off.
All
Talk to
right,
you later.
Winter Mute signing off.
Good to talk to you. Cheers.